Welcome to the deep dive. You've given us your sources, and well, we're here to pull out the crucial insights.
Yeah, the stuff that really matters helps you get informed without feeling totally overwhelmed.
Exactly. So today, our source is Pope Francis's encyclical letter Laudato Si'. It's titled On Care for Our Common Home.
And it's a really fascinating document. It goes way beyond just being a religious text.
Oh, absolutely. Think of this as a kind of guided tour through its arguments. It really explores how deeply connected our environmental problems are to, well, everything else. Social issues, the
We'll
economy.
be digging into those core arguments, the connections it makes, some might surprise you, and the sort of paths forward it suggests.
And it draws on a lot, doesn't it? Science, philosophy, and obviously the Judeo-Christian tradition, all through the lens of this encyclical.
Right. Our goal here is basically to give you a clear, concise grasp of the main concerns and ideas presented.
Okay, so where do we start? The opening is pretty evocative.
It really is. That quote from St. Francis of Assisi, Laudato si, mi Signore, praise be to you, my Lord, it sets a very specific tone right away.
It does. It frames Earth not just as a resource pile, but as a sister, someone with whom we share our life.
And a beautiful mother who opens her arms to embrace us. That imagery, it immediately shifts your perspective, doesn't it?
Yeah, it makes you think about relationship, connection, rather than just, extraction or utility.
And it's worth looking at the historical context Pope Francis brings in.
Yeah.
He makes it clear he's not just inventing this concern out of thin air.
Right, he mentions Pope St. John XXIII and Pacem in Terrace.
Exactly. During the Cold War, the nuclear crisis,
Yeah.
that was the church speaking out on a massive global threat, addressing everyone.
So there's a precedent for this kind of universal call.
Definitely. And then he points to Blessed Pope Paul VI back in the early 70s.
He was already warning about ecology.
He was talking about the potential tragic consequence of unchecked human activity. He even used the phrase ecological catastrophe.
Wow. That early on.
Yeah, and warning that just having more technology wasn't enough. We needed moral development alongside it. Pretty insightful looking back.
And St. John Paul II continued that thread.
He did. He worried about seeing nature purely in utilitarian terms. Just something for immediate use and consumption. He saw the inherent danger in that.
And he was the one who called for a global ecological conversion.
Yes, understanding that our environmental behavior reflects our inner moral state. It's about this authentic human ecology. So it's deeper than just recycling bins.
It's a fundamental shift in perspective.
Exactly. Then Pope Benedict XVI then comes in, really hammering the connection between environmental decay and social decay.
How so?
He argued they both kind of spring from the same root problem. This idea of limitless human freedom, detached from any truth or responsibility beyond our own immediate desires.
Sort of like if we don't recognize limits or higher values, everything suffers.
That's the idea. Creation itself suffers. And then Pope Francis brings in another important voice, Ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomew.
Ah, the Orthodox perspective, highlighting the ecumenical side of this concern.
Right. And Bartholomew uses some really strong language. He talks about repenting for harming the planet.
Repenting.
Yes, he actually defines causing environmental damage as a sin. That really underscores the moral weight of it all, our personal responsibility for the disfigurement and destruction of creation.
That's powerful. And tying it all together before getting into the specifics of the crisis is St. Francis of Assisi.
The example par excellence, as the encyclical calls him. He embodies this idea of integral ecology.
And he's admired so widely, even outside Christian circles.
Exactly. And the key thing the encyclical highlights about him is how his love for nature wasn't separate from his love for the poor or his commitment to society or his own inner peace.
It was all one thing.
All interconnected. Not just an intellectual idea, but a lived reality. A sense of kinship, of fraternity with every single creature. It's about affection, not just economics.
Okay, so that's the foundation. Let's move into the present ecological crisis as the encyclical lays it out. It sounds like it doesn't sugarcoat things.
Not at all. It starts with these troubling questions. We just can't sidestep anymore.
Yeah.
And the goal, it says, isn't just data. It's about becoming painfully aware, feeling our responsibility.
So, first up, pollution and climate change.
Yeah, it covers all sorts. Air pollution, industrial waste, chemicals from farming, just the sheer amount of garbage we produce.
And the health impacts.
Huge. Especially it notes for the poor. And it cautions against this simplistic idea that technology alone is going to fix everything.
That point about waste really jumps out. Hundreds of millions of tons every year.
Yeah.
Much of it not biodegradable.
Exactly. It contrasts our linear throwaway culture, take, make, dispose, with how nature works in perfect cycles.
Right, where waste becomes food for something else.
We're just so far from that. The encyclical points out how slow we've been to adopt a truly circular model where we actually reuse and reintegrate materials effectively.
Then there's climate change, the big one.
It lays out the scientific consensus, the warming trends, the link to greenhouse gases, the disruption of the carbon cycle, rising sea levels, more extreme weather.
But it stresses the human cost, right? Especially for poorer nations.
Absolutely. Developing countries, people whose lives depend directly on natural resources farming, fishing they're hit first and hardest, and often have the fewest resources to cope.
And ocean acidification, that's mentioned too.
Yes, the CO2 dissolving in the oceans, changing the chemistry, threatening marine life, coral reefs, the whole food chain. It's a serious, though maybe less visible, part of the crisis.
Okay, moving from the air and climate to water, another critical resource.
Critical is the word. The encyclical highlights this paradox. Unsustainable consumption in developed countries, while elsewhere, basic access to safe drinking water is a massive problem.
Demand is outstripping supply in many places.
Dramatically so. It specifically mentions water poverty, especially in Africa, as a major source of suffering.
And it's not just quantity, but quality.
Right. Pollution affects the water sources the poor rely on most, leading to disease. Contamination of groundwater from industry and agriculture is another huge concern raised.
And the encyclical takes a strong stance on privatizing water, doesn't it?
Very strong. It argues access to safe, drinkable water is a fundamental human right, essential, not just another commodity to be traded.
So denying access is a social injustice.
A grave social debt owed to the poor is how it puts it. It also flags the potential for rising food costs and even conflict as water becomes scarcer.
Then the loss of biodiversity,
That's it.
species extinction.
Yeah, the encyclical critiques this short-sighted economic view where we just plunder resources without thinking long-term. We lose species, maybe losing cures or ecological linchpins we don't even know about yet.
But it also says species have value in themselves, right? Not just for us.
Precisely, an intrinsic value. And the rate of extinction driven by human activity is described as alarming. We're talking thousands of species vanishing forever, every year potentially.
And it's not just the big charismatic animals.
No, it stresses the importance of the often overlooked ones. Fungi, algae, worms, insects, microorganisms. They're crucial for soil health, decomposition, pollination, the whole balance. Human interventions can disrupt these complex systems in ways we don't fully foresee.
What about habitats? Deforestation.
Major focus, especially critical ecosystems like the Amazon and Congo basins. Also the replacement of diverse forests with monoculture plantations, which are far less ecologically rich.
And wetlands, mangroves.
Also mentioned as vital ecosystems being destroyed at alarming rates. Same with oceans overfishing, destructive methods like bottom trawling, pollution harming coral reefs, and marine life generally.
So the call is for more understanding.
Definitely. More research into how ecosystems actually work, the intricate connections. We need a better inventory of life on Earth and strategies to protect it before it's too late.
What's really striking is how the encyclical then links all this environmental stuff to a decline in human quality of life, social breakdown.
That's central to its argument. Environmental degradation isn't separate from issues like urban decay, unemployment, social exclusion, rising violence, drug trafficking, even a loss of cultural identity. It sees them as interconnected symptoms.
It even touches on the digital world.
Yeah, suggesting that the sheer volume and pace of information, the nature of digital interaction, can sometimes hinder wisdom, deep reflection, and genuine relationships. It talks about a kind of mental pollution.
Leading to more isolation.
Potentially, yes. A different kind of environmental impact affecting our inner lives and social bonds.
And throughout all this, the theme of global inequality keeps surfacing.
Constantly. The core message is the human environment and the natural environment deteriorate together, and the poorest always bear the heaviest burden.
Examples.
Depleted fish stocks hitting small fishing communities, water pollution affecting those who can't afford bottled water, rising sea levels displacing coastal populations in poor countries. The impacts are not distributed fairly.
And the encyclical suggests there's a lack of awareness about this in richer parts of the world.
A definite critique. A failure to really see or acknowledge the problems affecting the excluded, who are, it reminds us, the the majority of the planet's people. Their voices are often marginalized in international forums.
So a real ecological approach has to be social.
It must be a social approach. That's non-negotiable in Laudato Si. Integrating justice for the poor into the discussion about the environment. Hearing both the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor, they are one cry.
It also tackles overconsumption directly.
Yes, pointing out that the levels of consumption in developed countries are simply unsustainable if universalized. It generates immense waste and ecological strain.
And this leads to the idea of ecological debt.
Right. The idea that the global north owes a debt to the south because of historical trade imbalances, disproportionate use of resources over centuries, and exporting polluting industries or waste.
That's quite a charge.
It is. It highlights practices like extracting raw materials from poorer countries, primarily for the benefit of the north, and dumping waste or toxic materials there.
Okay, so the problem is laid out starkly. What about the responses? The encyclical seems critical here too.
Very critical. It speaks of the weakness of international political responses. Environmental summits often producing little binding action.
Why?
It suggests politics is too often subservient to technology and finance. Special interests, economic pressures, tend to override the common good.
Leading to just talk, no real action.
Superficial rhetoric, maybe some minor adjustments, but a reluctance to make the deep changes needed. Obstructionism by powerful interests.
And finance.
The focus on short-term financial gain, speculation, often ignores the long-term human and environmental costs. Profit becomes the main, sometimes only, criterion.
The encyclical also mentions obstacles like denial, indifference.
Yeah, or just shrugging it off.
No.
Or, on the other hand, a kind of blind faith that technology will inevitably save us, so we don't need to change our ways fundamentally.
It acknowledges different views, though.
Yes, it mentions the spectrum, from those who think technology solves everything to those who see humanity as purely a destructive force. It argues for finding solutions between those extremes.
But the overall assessment is pretty grim.
It concludes this section saying our common home is in serious disrepair, and the current system is fundamentally unsustainable. We're headed for crisis if we don't change course.
Which brings us to this concept it introduces, the technocratic paradigm. What exactly is that?
It's described as a dominant mindset, a way of thinking that prioritizes technological solutions, efficiency, and control above all else. It tends to view the natural world primarily as raw material, something to be manipulated and exploited for human ends.
So it's more than just using technology.
Oh yeah, it's a whole worldview. It shapes how we see progress, how we make economic decisions, even political ones. If something can be done technologically, the ethical questions about whether it should be done sometimes get pushed aside. Profit and power linked to technology become key drivers.
And it affects how we think.
Yes, the encyclical suggests that the specialization that comes with this paradigm can lead to a loss of the bigger picture. Experts focus on their narrow field, losing sight of the whole, the interconnectedness, the ethical dimensions.
So if that's the dominant paradigm, what's the alternative?
The alternative proposed is integral ecology. This is really the heart of the encyclical's constructive proposal.
Integral ecology, meaning
Meaning an approach that recognizes everything is interconnected. You can't separate environmental issues from social issues, economic issues, cultural issues, our daily lives, our inner peace. It's all one complex system.
the environment isn't out there, separate from us.
Exactly. To solve ecological problems, you have to understand human behavior, social structures, economic incentives. And critically, it insists that nature, ecosystems have their own intrinsic value, regardless of their usefulness to us.
How does this break down practically?
Well, it talks about needing an economic ecology, building environmental costs and benefits right into economic decision-making, not treating them as external. Then social ecology, recognizing that the health of institutions, from the family unit all the way up to international bodies, affects the environment. Social breakdown often leads to environmental neglect or harm.
And culture.
Cultural ecology is vital too. It warns against a consumerist monoculture, flattening local diversity. Technical solutions imposed from outside often fail if they don't respect local cultures, wisdom, and history.
What about our immediate surroundings?
That's the ecology of daily life. Our built environments, cities, homes, transport profoundly affect our well-being, our sense of community, our relationship with nature. It calls for better urban planning, protecting common spaces, addressing housing crises.
And human ecology.
This goes deeper into our very nature as human beings. Respecting the moral law inscribed in our nature, including accepting our own bodies as a gift. The encyclical links this to accepting the world as a gift from a creator. It critiques attempts to erase fundamental human realities, like sexual difference, seeing it as part of this broader failure to accept limits and given realities.
And tying it all together is justice.
Justice between the generations, a crucial part of integral ecology. We have a moral obligation to leave a habitable, flourishing planet for future generations, not just use everything up ourselves.
So, rejecting a purely short-term utilitarian view?
Absolutely. It calls for intergenerational solidarity and notes that environmental degradation also goes hand in hand with ethical and cultural decline. We also need intergenerational solidarity caring for the poor and vulnerable now.
All this points towards...
What? Towards needing what the encyclical calls a bold cultural revolution, a fundamental shift.
a revolution.
Yeah, meaning we need to consciously slow down, step back from the frantic pace, look at reality differently, recover values like contemplation, gratitude, sobriety, and fraternity that have been overshadowed by this relentless drive for technological control and consumption. It's about prioritizing reality over abstract technical thought.
Okay, so that's the vision. How do we get there? What are the paths forward?
Dialogue is presented as absolutely essential at every single level.
Internet.
Yes. Robust international dialogue leading to binding agreements, especially on things like phasing out fossil fuels and investing heavily in renewable energy. Though it acknowledges the political and business reaction has been frustratingly slow and often inadequate.
But agreements need teeth, right?
Exactly. It highlights the need for better enforcement mechanisms and effective global governance for shared resources, the oceans, the atmosphere, etc.
And at the national and local levels.
Equally important, good planning, coordination between different levels of government, strong law enforcement against environmental damage, promoting best practices, fostering innovation from the ground up.
And the role of citizens.
Crucial.
Yeah.
Civil society putting pressure on governments, raising awareness, driving change locally. It stresses there's no single blueprint. Solutions need to be tailored, often involving transitional steps alongside firm, long-term commitments.
Concrete actions.
Things like serious energy conservation, better waste management systems, promoting sustainable agriculture, protecting water sources, and critically, always asking if a proposed project truly contributes to integral development, not just economic growth, but human flourishing in the broadest sense.
What about the economy itself? The dialogue between politics and economics.
Seen as vital. The encyclical argues economics needs to be put back in service of human life, not the other way around. It critiques the dominance of finance-driven thinking and rejects the idea that free markets alone will magically solve environmental problems.
So redefining progress.
Absolutely. Moving beyond just GDP, we need metrics that include environmental and social well-being. It even suggests that maybe some parts of the global economy need to consciously contain unsustainable growth to allow for healthy growth elsewhere, encouraging more sober lifestyles in wealthier regions.
And ethics in decision-making.
Essential. True ethical decisions consider long-term impacts, the common good, the effects on the poor and future generations, not just immediate profit or convenience. It calls for a far-sighted politics, capable of taking an integrated, interdisciplinary approach.
Education seems key to all this.
Hugely important. Not just environmental facts, but education that fosters new habits, challenges consumerist myths, promotes solidarity, responsibility, critical thinking, even aesthetic appreciation for the beauty of creation.
It's about changing hearts and minds, not just policies.
Exactly. It talks about needing an ecological conversion, a community conversion, really. Lasting change comes from a deep shared shift in values.
What does that conversion look like?
It involves cultivating gratitude, a sense of gratuitousness, appreciating things as gifts, not just commodities, developing a loving awareness of our connection to all other creatures, seeing the divine reflected in the world. For Christians, it means living out this dimension of their faith more fully.
And finding joy differently.
Yes, finding joy and peace, not in endless accumulation, but in simplicity. The wisdom of less is more, being present to the moment serenely.
So it's not about deprivation.
Not at all. It's about liberation, finding freedom from obsessive consumerism, finding true happiness in relationships, in service, in art, in nature, in prayer. Simple things.
It also talks about civic and political love.
Right. Extending that sense of care and responsibility beyond our immediate circle to the structures of society. Working for the common good through social, economic, and political action. Building a civilization of love, a culture of care.
There's a spiritual dimension woven throughout.
Deeply woven. It touches on the mystical connection between God and all beings, referencing saints who experience this profoundly.
And specific Christian practices.
The Eucharist is mentioned as a place where heaven and earth meet, uniting us with creation and motivating us to be its stewards. Sunday rest is also highlighted not just as a break, but as a way to heal relationships, appreciate creation, and reorient our perspective away from constant work and consumption.
And finally, this idea of the Trinity.
Just a brief mention, but suggesting that the very nature of God as a communion of love is somehow reflected in the interconnectedness of creation, an invitation to see reality through that Trinitarian lens.
So wrapping it all up.
It's a powerful, urgent reminder that everything is connected. A call for deep reflection and equally deep action, personal and collective, to care for this common home we all share.
The encyclical ends with prayers, doesn't it?
Yes, two beautiful prayers. One more universal, a prayer for our earth, appealing to shared values. The other, a Christian prayer in union with creation, grounding the call in Christian faith. Both offer hope and encourage that personal commitment.
So a final thought for you, the listener, drawing from the end of the encyclical. It speaks of this journey towards a final harmony, a Sabbath of eternity where all creation finds its fulfillment.
Maybe consider your own part in that unfolding story. How can you seek and protect the infinite beauty of God reflected in the fragile world around us? There's certainly much more to explore in Laudato Si itself, a deep dive worth continuing.